And so are there any other evidences that we can observe today that suggest a recent creation?
Yeah, there are. Look, the surface of the moon, for instance, has these things called scarps on them.
Yep.
These are like abrupt changes. We find them here on the Earth. You'll have an escarpment where you have a high plateau and then a cliff and a lower area. And it looks just like one part of the crust has been lifted up. And these are quite clearly recent because the cratering around them shows that, well, let me wind back. If there had been an old crater and the scarp had happened, right, you would see that crater partly obliterated if it was right where the scarp was. And that's what is observed.
Yeah.
So there were some craters there. The scarp, this uplift, has partly filled it in. Subsequently, there have been impacts on the scarps, which indicate that there's been impacts after them. So these things are happening in relatively recent past. Yeah. And what it suggests is that the moon is still cooling and the crust is contracting. So as it contracts, you get these geological effects happening and a slip happens and this scarp occurs. So that's very interesting because it's telling us that the moon is still cooling. Now, if you think about it, it's only 1/80th the mass of the Earth. It's pretty small. And if it's been around for 4.5 billion years, even if it started out molten, it should be a solid lump of rock by now.
So it should be dead.
It should be dead, geologically dead. You shouldn't be seeing geological activity taking place. But there is. There are things called transient lunar phenomena. These are things that occur very briefly, consequently quite hard to measure and observe. People see things like flashes that occur. They see mists or clouds that appear and then dissipate. And interestingly, Apollo 15 registered the presence of a radioactive gas called radon, 222 rather is the atomic number, which is an unstable form of radon. It decays very quickly, has a half-life of only 3.8 days. So that means it's not going to stick around for very long. So just when the Apollo 15 modules were on the surface of the moon, they detected this stuff, which must have only been around for a matter of a few days. So that says there was some kind of recent geological activity.
Amazing.
So we see a geologically active moon, but that's not consistent with an age of 4.5 billion years. Another fascinating one are ghost craters. Remember we talked about these Lunar Maria, these large black areas of solidified lava, which are hard and flat. Now, ghost craters are faint outlines of a crater. You can just see the circle. It's like the edge of the crater just poking up through the lava and it's all solidified.
Okay.
So it's not a deep crater. So if you think about it, after the lava has solidified, if there was an impact from a meteoroid, it would have left a crater. And we see nice, clear, small craters on the Maria.
It would have broken it.
Yeah, but they're no big deal. They're just like the craters on the other side in the rocks. There they are, hitting a hard surface. If there'd been an impact before the flow of lava, then the lava would have simply filled it in and you wouldn't see it. So the fact that you see ghost craters suggests that the impact occurred before the lava had hardened. So how long does it take lava to set? Well, depends on how much and all those sorts of things. You might be able to stretch it out perhaps to a year, but more likely months or something like that. We see volcanic eruptions happening on the Earth and it's not long before the lava is solidified.
Well, surely not long.
No, not long at all. Like you see volcanic eruptions on the Earth, the lava flows and it's all, hot and liquid and then it sets, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you see pictures of it all the time.
That's right.
That black basalt rock.
Yeah, and it becomes basaltic rock. Exactly. So these Maria would probably have solidified, maybe being generous, perhaps a year or something like that. And yet these ghost craters are present. So that tells us that the craters occurred while the lava was still molten. Now remember, the evidence points strongly to this all happening very rapidly. And so you think, well, hang on a minute, that tells us that the rate of cratering must be quite high. There must be quite a few frequent impacts happening all the time.
Yeah.
Now, the secular model is that cratering is quite rare, that it happens very slowly. So if I were to look at a moon or a planet and count the craters on it, if I assume it's a very slow cratering rate, I'll get a very old age for that moon or planet, right? But if the cratering rate is much faster, then those things would be younger. So can you see how it doesn't play into the secular model of billions of years?
Okay.
Cratering rate's too fast.
Well, especially if it's hitting magma.
That's right. Hitting magma and leaving ghost craters. And there's not just one or two of them, there are a lot of these. Now, bear in mind, the secularists are very, these guys are clever. They're trying to understand why things are the way they are. But remember, they're locked into a paradigm that won't allow a supernatural creation. So they're forced to find naturalistic explanation. So this is a big puzzle, all these Maria on one side and not on the other.
Yeah.
So with the aid of some very clever measurements of the moon's gravitational field, they've discovered that the crust on the far side of the moon is about 20 kilometres thicker than the crust on the near side of the moon.
Wow.
And they say, that's the answer to why there are Maria on our side but not on the other, because the crust is so much thicker that it survived the impacts without shattering and without releasing all the magma, right? So you don't get these lava flows on the far side of the moon. But an alternate explanation is that this face towards us, got so pounded that the crust was so mashed and so much lava came out that it hasn't had time to recover properly. And remember, according to the Bible, this happened probably about 4,500 years ago, likely at the time that the flood was triggered. And the flood occurred about 1,600 years after the creation, according to the Bible's timelines. And that makes a lot of sense. So you have a rapid, relatively recent bombardment, and it's on the face that's looking at the Earth. Now think about this. So there's the moon, we're looking at it. These things have hit that way, we're looking at the side. So they must have come from behind the Earth, probably hit the Earth, right?
Yeah, hit me in the back of the head.
Hit in the back of the head, exactly.
That's right.
Except that, and you would think, therefore, there should be ample evidence of large craters, massive craters on the Earth.
And do we have those?
And we do, but they're not on one side.
Okay.
They're distributed. The reason being, of course, that the Earth spins much faster than the moon. The moon's very slow. Remember, it takes 27 days to turn once. We go around once a day. That's what a day is.
Yeah.
So if this bombardment lasted a day, say, it would have still distributed massive craters all around the Earth.
Amazing.
Now, there's a great video in this series done by Dr Taz Walker. And he talks about cratering on the Earth and the moon and some of the large craters we find on the Earth. Now, just think the impact on the Earth's crust would have been absolutely devastating. And some biblical creationists, I'd be one of them, would argue that that was likely one of the triggers that started Noah's flood by fracturing the plates, what we now find as continental or tectonic plates on the Earth at the initial part of the flood when the fountains of the great deep burst forth.
Yeah.
Maybe these two things are correlated. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Now, Mark, a little bit earlier we spoke about one of the resources that we have available at Creation Ministries that helps explain evolution and the science behind it. Can you introduce that product for us?
I certainly will. And we did talk about this, and you told me that it had a very important part in your faith journey.
Yeah, indeed it did, because I was a theistic evolution believing. But unfortunately, the science just didn't add up. The more I looked into it, the more holes it was in. And it was actually thanks to this. I must have watched it at least 7 times until I started to actually get the science behind it, because I am not an intellectual. You know, I work in the gardens, but the science, when it was articulated simply, there was too many holes.
Yeah.
And it just gave me a greater understanding and a greater faith to believing in God's word as it is, and not as sometimes I want it to be.
That's fantastic, Matt. I'm sure a lot of people will be impacted just as you were.
Yeah.
So the product is called, of course, Evolution's Achilles Heels.
Yeah, and we're going to make this available on the website for up to 7 days for free, isn't that right?
That's right.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for being with us today and having these discussions. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And it's been great fun doing it. Thanks, Matt.
God bless.